Welcome to Hello Grow.
The number one growth podcast.
I'm Court Brady.
I am Carlos Souza.
And today we have Josh Law and Toby LaVigne on the podcast. Stoked to have you guys.
Great to be here.
We're great to be here. Happy to be here.
Introductions on both of you guys. Josh, you are a board member at a handful of nonprofits and also the Make-A-Wish Foundation for Wyoming, which I hope we have a little bit of time to get into.
Sure.
You are also the co-founder of Go Fast Don't Die and the CEO and founder of Only Co, which is a business helping businesses create brand strategy and growth.
That's all right.
And Toby, I'm going to ask you about this transition afterwards, but you were a deckhand and captain on a commercial fishing rig off the coast of New England for 15 years, after which you were then the CEO and founder at multiple companies which had multiple exits, which had hundreds of employees. So I got to ask about that transition in just a second. And you're also an author. You've been highly involved on the board of YPO, other nonprofits, and now you help entrepreneurs increase their freedom and elevate their businesses.
That sounds about right.
We're pumped to have you guys. So we thought with your guys' experience, we could go into branding, leadership, finding purpose. We could have a whole discussion about freedom, the state of our country right now. We're going to talk about strategy, how to create a winning strategy. But before we jump into that, I just need a little bit of a background, Toby, on how you go from captain of a fishing rig to CEO of multiple companies with multiple exits.
It's not obvious.
Seems so straightforward. And I love that you gave the intro you did with Toby, because I've been telling him, like, you got to work better at introing your story. So the fact that now Toby doesn't have to, because
I got it. Yeah.
it is awesome. Because his story is super cool, and I'm super proud to know this guy. And I'm excited for everyone to hear kind of how that happened.
Yeah, I literally grew up across the street from the harbor on Cape Cod. And as a kid, I absolutely hated school. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how much I hated it. And so that was never a good thing in my house, crying, screaming, match every report card. And to make it worse, my siblings were in the gifted program. And my mother was a teacher. So not a good combination. But, I loved to work. I loved to earn money. I loved boats, loved fishing. And, it started, literally I had to stand on a milk carton to see over the helm when I was, first started as a deckhand. Later got my own skiff and, a lot of lobster pots, and worked my way up to deckhand on some commercial boats for long lining for cod and bluefin tuna. And ultimately became a captain. And the way the transition kind of works is there was this really successful gentleman, and I think there's a message here for young people that I share a lot, and it has to do with networking. And the boat I worked on was super successful. And so people we knew where the fish were, and the sports fishermen would want to come by and try to get stuff from us, which of course we never gave them. But there's this one gentleman, and I really liked him. He was about 65, and I liked him. And one day I just said, completely accidentally, could I come see what you do? Well, if you ask a successful 65-year-old man to tell you how he became him, I mean, you basically just made his life. It's like, my kids don't listen to me, but there's someone who wants to listen. So it turned into an invite, like for lunch. And literally after an entire afternoon tour of his kingdom, and he turns out was like Mr. Cape Cod. He owned the mall, strip malls, thousands of apartments, a construction company, a real estate company, a phone company, a fence company, alarm company. I mean, it was like insane. And it was just a wonderful experience. So like several months later in the winter, I came back from a trip, and there's a message on my answering machine like, Toby, this is Palmer, come see me. I'm like, all right. And so I did, and he said, look, I want you to come work for me. I don't think you should be on a fishing boat the rest of your life. And at that point, I thought, I'm going to fish the rest of my life. And he said, I don't know what you're going to do, but I want you to work here. It was a huge pay cut. But something just about this man and what he was up to just made me think, whatever this guy's up to looks like a damn lot of fun. Like, he even had a plane, like, to get all over New England and stuff. I just thought, like, this much variety and awesomeness. Like, how do you not do this? So he literally had this like room right next to his office. They took off the door. The construction company kind of cleaned it out, threw a desk on. He's, I want you to hear my phone conversations. I want you to do this and that.
Wow.
And he started putting me in charge of all this stuff. I got my contractor's license, my real estate license. He put me through flight school. I got my pilot's license. Next thing you know, I'm like, early 20s, and I'm flying all over New England, just managing these projects, making 40 and 50-year-old men really nervous. Like, this kid's going to come take our jobs. Well, it was an incredible adventure, but at some point I got it in my stupid head that I probably need to go to business school, which I did not have the grades for. But I applied to a bunch of Ivy League schools, and he had happened to go to Harvard. He said, Toby, I can't get you into Harvard, but I'll get you in anywhere else you want. So he writes this recommendation. I'm not kidding you. It said, accept Toby without reservation, and he has this giant Trump-like signature, right? I'm like, how am I going to turn this in with my application? Well, I got into every one of them.
Wow.
With his recommendation.
Yeah. So I
gosh.
went through business school. While I was in business school, I ended up doing a project on digital printing and the transformation. So, I'm 58, so this goes back pre-email, pre-desktop publishing, but it was just coming on the scene. The Macs were coming up, and it was completely changing the printing industry because it was very film-based, very manual, and all of a sudden it was going electronic, and the power shift was about to just completely switch. So I bought this, pretty small printing company, and just redirected it toward on-demand printing, like the perfect time. And that was an incredible experience, and it led to the founding of the other company that you alluded to, which was called Hubcast. Because what ended up happening is we're doing all of this short-run on-demand printing for large corporations, and they had needs all over the world. And at that point, we were, fulfilling it, and they're spending tens of thousands of dollars a month on FedEx bills because paper is it's heavy. And so we came up with this idea that, we could link up all the printers around the world, or key ones. And so we created a network of 140-ish printing locations around the world so we could do same-day, next-day service. And so I think
You
I've
didn't
always...
have as much inventory either, right?
Zero. We literally could do everything on demand.
Before they'd have all this, like different accounts have all this paper just ready, pamphlets, whatever, to be shipped out, just sitting there. And now you didn't have to have inventory of paper or printed stuff.
And it literally started from a truck driver coming back and saying, we just printed some job. At the time, Digital Equipment Corporation was a giant computer company at the time. You probably haven't heard of them. They got bought by Compaq probably before you were born. And, he said, Toe, we just these are huge pallets of brochures and boxes. He said, I just put that job next to the last 5 of the same job we've already printed. They had no idea how much inventory they had of all this collateral. Because back then, you got to remember, they didn't have websites. If you didn't go to a sales call with a brochure, it's like
You're lost.
you're naked. And so that was kind of really what started us on the path of man, this is stupid. They think they're saving money because they're doing this stuff all in high run, and so the per unit cost feels good, but the total cost was gigantic between the shipping, the storage, the obsolescence. Most of it went to dumpster. So we got to the point where we could print 500 or 1,000 or something. And the thing that was really cool at the time is that all of our competitors thought those little jobs were a nuisance, but for us they were insanely profitable. So we could
High margin.
Right, yeah, we could
charge a lot per sheet.
Exactly. And we said we could have it by Friday, and they'd be like, no one can get us anything by Friday. And so we just got into all these big accounts that we never could have otherwise, and we just kept eroding.
It's so interesting how many companies start with the innovator's dilemma.
And that's what it was.
The very small stuff that the bigger companies don't want to deal with, and you find some innovative way. Is the exact same thing that happened. We came out with remote inspections. No one else wanted to do it. It was no, we have to be boots on the ground, touching the assets. No one's going to buy into a virtual inspection of a multi-million-dollar asset. And now all of our biggest competitors are building their own software to compete with us on virtual inspections because we've taken so much of their business. So
I'm glad that's one of my favorite books. I'm glad you mentioned it because it's exactly what happened. And the big guys think just like they said in the book of Dilemma, they can have the little peanuts. Well, the peanuts turned into the entire circus.
Gold nuggets.
Yeah. I do have one question I have so many questions from that story. But one of them that I'm quite passionate about, that afternoon that you spent with that man, I'd love to hear how that changed you. And the background of that is the biggest thing anyone has ever done for me was, so my dad we grew up cleaning swimming pools. So my dad had a little business. Mm-hmm. We lived close to this rich neighborhood, so we would go there and clean their pools. My dad would make me work for him the entire summer, every year. That was the best thing that he did for me, because we would go to these people's homes and these guys would come out, talk to us for a little bit. I'd see what they were driving. I'd see their homes. And that allowed me to dream. Because where I grew up, people didn't even know that type of thing existed, right? All of a sudden, my dad's taking me there every day, and I'm now dreaming. And that was the best thing anyone has ever done for me. I would love to hear about how that afternoon changed you and your trajectory.
Great question, and I think my experience is very similar. I'd never seen anything like that. I mean, I knew fishermen, obviously. I knew a lot of people that worked with their hands, but I'd never seen the behind the scenes of like what some successful adult did, and I certainly never conceived of an empire like that or that much like variety and excitement. Like his days were just like, oh, we'll go to a hotel meeting. Now we're going to talk about construction. Now we're going to go. It's like, how much fun is that?
I love that.
Yeah,
That's so cool.
I think when anyone can broaden your horizons, it's pretty cool,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Well, guys, I think for the book Scaling Up talks about cash, strategy, execution, and people. I think most people, when they start a business, figure out hopefully the execution side, and they have to figure out the cash side pretty quickly, or else they'll go out of business. Most of them don't figure out the people side, which never allows them to figure out the strategy side. So if you can't figure out the people side, you can't pull your head out of the business far enough to look around and say, what are we going to go do? So let's dive into strategy, talk about what a winning strategy is. And the first question is, how do you guys define strategy? And what I want to get to is, where does somebody start if they're wanting to figure out how to create a winning strategy? But before we get there, let's just first define what is strategy.
So I think we'll see what happens here in terms of what I end up saying. I think it's a little like if you put 5 sort of good marketers in a room and say, what is brand? You'll sort of get, and they can't hear each other. They'll probably get 5 different kind of meandering definitions. So I'll just say, when I think about strategy from a business perspective, I'm thinking about it like, who is my customer and what is my business model? And by business model, I mean, how am I solving that problem in a way that is repeatable and profitable and is kind of self-learning, like it makes the thing improve. And so who am I serving and how am I serving them, I think is the way I really think about. And someone taught me that long ago and just said, they told me like the modern business plan is dead. And I was just like, I didn't really know what the modern business plan meant. But like all the different things, if you look up like business plan, it'll have all kinds of stuff. And it'll have this like entrepreneur math. It's just like chaos, like total addressable market and a lot of numbers. You're like, oh, it's $1 billion market. It's like,
I hate the acronym TAM. Yeah, every time I hear it, and it's always from an investor.
What does that mean?
What's the total addressable market? It's like, I don't think it's swear. Who cares? Like, whether this is a $50 million market or a $50 billion market,
Yeah.
we still got to figure out how to get 10 satisfied customers. That's the only thing I got to solve. And it's big enough that I can make a lot of money. Yeah. That's all I know.
Especially with new categories and things. It's like, it makes me think of what is the total addressable market of like, Ford's first pickup or car or whatever before it was ever made. It's like, well, I don't know, because I don't know the attributes of the buyer, but I know that, if I asked them what they wanted, they'd say a faster horse. But if I ask them what they're trying to accomplish or what problems they have and go beyond the obvious, I start to understand like, well, it's kind of dusty. I have to deal with horses. I've got to feed horses. When it's cold out, they're finicky. I mean, like, okay, sounds like there's a problem here around like the horse. What if we didn't have to have the horse? You know, like the process of inventing that is interesting. But if you said like, how many people will buy a car? It's like, well, what are the attributes of the car? You know, so it's just challenging if you try to hit that too early.
Toby, you talk to a lot of businesses, a lot of business owners. If you could take a poll of all businesses in America, what % of the companies have a winning strategy set up and established?
It's got to be a pretty small percentage, right?
Single digits, less than 10%?
Oh, for sure.
And what are they missing out on because they don't have that strategy? What do they have to deal with, and what could the land of milk and honey look like if they were to put a winning strategy?
The downstream effects of not having a great strategy get really big because everything comes from there, right? I mean, anything from the kind of people that want to work there, the way that people feel when they work there, the amount of friction, it's uphill, cash. I mean, you could go forever because when you find something that really perks up people's ears in the way, when I came in, we asked about like, what's the problem you're solving? Like, that's the key. And, when we did that digital printing thing, the traditional deal is they go out and they get several bids, and we're all both playing poker, right? The printer and the buyer. The printer wants to sell it for the highest price. The buyer has got to tell their boss they bought it for the lowest price. Very difficult negotiation. It's a single variable, and it's win-lose, basically. We created this whole thing called print optimization, where we said, look, we're in the business of helping you reduce total print costs. We knew that was going to lead to more digital printing. We want it so we could get on the same side of the table. So I think so often people don't think deeply enough about what's it actually like to be the customer. What do they really want? And how do you stop being at odds? Like, that would be a great place to start with strategy.
There's a book that I'm sure you were forced to read in business school by Michael Porter. Talks a little bit about strategy.
A little bit.
And he, in that book, writes that strategy defined it as deliberately choosing a different set of activities to deliver a unique mix of value. You started with the customer first, and then said, how are we going to deliver a unique value to that customer? That requires trade-offs. I'm curious, in either of your guys' business, what were trade-offs that you made that were really fortunate that you made those trade-offs? And or on the flip side of that, when was a time where you chose not to make a trade-off that you should have made, and what was the end result?
Want to go first?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Could you ask the question one more time?
Yeah, so if we think of this idea of trade-offs and that being an integral part of strategy, that you have to deliver a unique mix of values to customers, and you have to make trade-offs to do that. What was a time where you made the right trade-offs and you were able to reap the rewards, or you made no trade-offs at all, and what was the result?
Yeah, so this is super specific, but in the work at OnlyCo, oftentimes we approach someone and they're looking for like, how much will this cost me and what will you do in terms of work that will, as a professional services and sort of consulting group and also delivery of work.
Do they word it as what will you do or what value will you add? Do they just say what will you do?
Usually what will you do?
How many hours will you give us?
Sometimes that, but
Interesting.
More frequently it's like, what are you going to do? Like,
Okay.
And how much is that going to cost? And we're constantly trying to disrupt that to kind of to get on the same side of the table as the way Toby's talking about it, is we're like, well, it would be crazy for us to just throw out a number right now because we don't know where you are as a business and where you want to be. So we have to establish some clarity of perspective here and kind of dream. Like we want to help you accomplish your dreams, and some people they get stuck in execution or like day to day where they kind of forget to dream to a certain degree. And so we're always trying to, I've probably closed, in many cases, a lot less accounts here and there over the years because I'm unwilling to just throw a number out and throw like deliverables together. Even if I have a reasonable belief that the things I might say they need to do, if they aren't bought into that process and we haven't established clarity of like, where are you today and where do you want to be in 3 to 5 years, then we're really just talking about stuff and cost. And I don't really want to be talking about stuff and cost. I want to be talking about value and goals and trying to track progress towards a future state that would be really great for our customer and really great for us in a way that we become a hero to them in some capacity. But if we can't establish clarity of where you are today as a business and where you want to be in a ways, 3 to 5 years, and not everything we're going to do is going to get them there faster than that, and we might not even be involved the whole time. Maybe we're just involved for 12 months, but I think of ourselves as being in the inflection business. We're trying to get our clients to inflect. Basically, they're headed this way, and we're just trying to get them to pitch up. And there's a node there, and that's change. And we're then trying to get them to a spot where they're now aimed higher. Like I see your book back here, 10X is easier than 2X. It's like that kind of thinking. Like get them to think a little bit bigger. And frankly, some trade-offs are there's work we could do that deliverable stuff, activity would probably help to some degree, but it's really a distraction from us being a hero to our customer, and we're trying to figure out who can we be a hero to.
You highlighted something that I think is so important in this whole conversation of do they have extreme clarity of where they want to go? Because if you don't know what you talked about, Toby, the problem that you want to solve, and I have clarity around what the customer needs, and then where do I want to go? Do I want to have a cash flowing business? Do I want to have a company that's built to sell? Yeah. Do I want to be highly involved in the business? Do I want to step out of the business? And the founder needs to know where he or she wants to go and needs to know where the business needs to go. Right. And then you can have a trade-off conversation.
Yes. You can't have a trade-off if you're not clear about what the implications are down the road.
Yeah.
Trade-offs are one of my favorite parts of the business strategic thinking, because they can be counterintuitive and they take courage, and they often take what feels like a short-term sacrifice for the long-term gain. And one of the things that drew me to Josh and OnlyCo and working with them is Josh came up, like I had been on the other side of the marketing conversation as a business owner, right? The agency comes in, we can do all this stuff, and then they lob some really big chokeable number at you. And you don't have a context for comparing it. Like I could look at a piece of capital equipment in my operation and say, all right, well, if we did this and we utilized it and blah, 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 I can see the ROI. But when someone just lobs a number, and so I think what's brilliant about what Josh came up with this diagnostic is he has to go through this short term, and I don't know if it's pain because he does it so well, but it can feel a little painful because the customer wants to just get a quote. That's what we're used to in a lot of cases. But Josh says, no, there's actually a fee for this. We're going to work with you for 4 to 6 weeks so that we can really get to know you. Because if we lob a number and you say yes, and we get down the road, we might do some of the wrong things. You're going to be disappointed. We don't look good. Even if OnlyCo does an awesome job,
it still might not work because you're not aligned on what the expectations are.
And so from that process, OnlyCo delivers a few pathways that have already been linked to quantified pain. So now they can make almost what feels like a tangible asset decision. But I think a lot of people are afraid to have that conversation, and I think fear really comes into trade-offs and strategy.
I feel like as we're talking about this, I'm thinking about a year and a half ago, we started a sales team at Aspen, and I was just celebrating any deal I could close, right? I was just we were just getting started. And now a year and a half, almost 2 years later, when I'm in a demo and a client just wanting to close, it's almost like I know that this is not going to be good for both of us, because a lot of times I can tell you 9 out of 10, I get a phone call in the middle of, Friday afternoon. I need this done by Monday. Okay, we need to jump on a call. I need to explain how we work. I need to understand what you're looking for. And they're like, no, I just need this done. I'll pay you. I know 9 times out of 10, that's going to be a painful customer to work with. We're going to lose resources, and they're going to be pissed. They're not going to like the end result. So do you feel like it also, having those trade-offs, not only you don't have a satisfied customer, but you also make our own lives as entrepreneurs and leaders easier? Has that been your experience?
Amen.
And I heard someone call this kind of concept, it's not quite what we're talking about, it's close, is this idea of bad profit. So bad profit is any profit you make that costs you a customer. And it's a little different because what we're talking about
Right.
is just being choosier about who our customer is. That's why when I go back to strategy, it's like, who is my customer and what is my business model to solve the problems that that customer has? So to your point, it's like that customer has some attributes and they're doing early signaling that they would be not a great fit for you, even though they have the need, they have the money, and you seem to have the solution. You're still, your gut tells you it's like, this is not quite right. You know, it's that due diligence, that gut that you just kind of learn, you know, and trying to figure that out is pretty challenging.
Yeah.
You know,
So
saying no to some stuff.
So going through that process of really understanding what they're looking for, what the future looks like, not only you have a satisfied customer at the end, but you make your own life a lot easier.
What are the characteristic traits necessary that somebody has to have to be able to make good trade-off decisions? You mentioned fear, so you have to have courage. You mentioned courage. What else is necessary? And then after that question, I'm curious to know what the hardest trade-offs are for people to make in business. But first, characteristic traits of somebody that can successfully put a strategy together.
I can riff on a few things.
Please.
Yeah. So a few thoughts came to mind. One was mentors. I think the ability to think more about the continuation of the game, kind of the infinite game concept. Like, okay, and I talk about this sometimes, like, okay, our goal is just to continue to exist a year from now because we'll be a lot smarter in a year. And sometimes we get kind of full of hubris, like, oh, we're just going to figure it out next month and then it'll be great. And I'm like, just more time, more reps is really what makes something great. And so the infinite kind of thinking. And then also some of it is just experience, just time. You know, like I know now when I'm vetting a potential customer or I'm helping a client think about how to position their product or how to, you know, attract more people or how to rebuild their website or a lot of different things. I've just seen a lot over 14 years. So, you know, I just like, this kind of reminds me of this. And this really didn't work so well for these reasons, you know. One small example of that would be I was meeting with this business alliance in Wyoming, and they're talking about we need to make sure Wyoming recognizes the challenges that it's facing as a state. It's very economically undiverse, very, very reliant on minerals and energy. And they said, we need to make everyone aware that this is a pending problem. And I said, maybe not wrong, but I've experienced this time where I tried to tell this small community that if they didn't change their ways, they were going to turn into a ghost town. And they didn't like that. It was true, but a visceral reaction, and it actually kind of backfired. And so you have to find the right ways to tell this story. I had that experience in the hopper that I could share it with this really cool group of people. And that, hey, we do want to tell this story about a pending, like, you know, the energy transition, everything that's going on in that space. Like, how do we help Wyoming be resilient in this change? And we can't just stand on the corner and say, you know, coal's gonna die. You know, that's not exactly like the best way to tell that story. You know, so figuring out how to tell that story. But I don't know if any of that sticks, but those are some things that come to mind.
Yeah, it's amazing. So they need to have clarity. They need to have long-term thinking. The most important, I love the quote or phrase, I don't know who said it first, but the most important negotiation is the next one. You need to be able to think a couple steps down the road and figure out how to survive the infinite game rather than the finite game. You have to be smart, and I think that's a developed attribute. That's not just this God-given, you're smart. It's you put in the reps. You go to business school, you do the things that make you smart, and then you have to be a great communicator. You have to be able to evangelize the strategy, or else it just falls on deaf ears and nothing happens, even if you have a terrific strategy. Toby, any attributes you'd add?
I'm sure we covered many, but the one that I just jotted down here is sort of a refusal to accept that things have to be the way everyone says they are. That's one of my favorites. It's why does it have to be this painful forever? And I think it's like they say, sometimes like leaders, are they born or are they made? You know, whatever strengths I have, I think were born out of largely out of my experience with school and how much I hate it, and probably how much time I spent staring out the window asking myself, why isn't there a better way to learn or something? And I can't look at anything and not think that. I mean, but sometimes to my detriment. Like there's a story I like to tell people that you got to be careful how far you go with this. My little sister and I were little kids, and there's some kind of bee that lives in the ground. I don't know what the heck it was, but we're sort of squatted down like little kids, and they're coming out single file, like almost like they're commuting to work that morning. And I'm just thinking one at a time's kind of inefficient. So I run back to the garage and I grab this paint stirrer and widen the hole. And we went into the house, and my mother was picking bees off us for the next half hour. So sometimes maybe you should say things, just, leave it alone, which maybe is where the intelligence comes in.
As you're talking, this quote came to my mind. The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress is dependent on the unreasonable man.
I love that quote.
That's a widen the hole. Let's get those bees out here.
Yeah, why not?
Widen the hole.
Carlos, anything you'd add? Characteristics of someone that can make great trade-off decisions, or some characteristics that keep people from making great trade-off decisions.
I'm sure I could think of some, but what this guy said are great. Nothing to add.
One thing I think maybe I'll bring up is people have most people I come across have they have very little training or education or even knowledge about economics and supply and demand and opportunity cost, and I think our school system just we overemphasize Pythagoras theorem over supply and demand, which is just weird to me because every day we live supply and demand, and every day we do not live Pythagoras theorem. At least
I love that.
Yes.
And so
the a squared plus b squared equals c squared just rolls off the tongue. It's so amazing to say.
Yeah, exactly. But I think just a working knowledge of supply and demand, what it means to have the trade-offs, and then so that opportunity cost, people really. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, lives in Salt Lake here, has a company called Tobacco Motorwear, and they basically make protective pants and jackets and stuff, and they look cool too. So the idea is if it looks cool, then you'll actually wear it, and if it's protective, that's great, But he was just talking to me hey, I think I won't go into deep detail about it, but he basically was just talking about the trade-offs of selling his product at a lower price, to where he could move his product faster, have less product on the shelf, get the conversion to cash, and be able to buy more product. Mm-hmm. He's explaining to me kind of 101, just, cash conversion and inventory and supply and demand. And I told him, I feel so sorry, Dave. I kind of just thought everything you explained to me, I thought is how you saw your business, because it's how I see my business. So I've never talked to you about this when I've been coaching and helping you think through it, because I thought you were already there. And he was well, and jokingly, he's well, I'm pissed at you, man, because I didn't know any of this stuff. And he's telling me, I think I should, anyway, lower my price and maybe I could sell more. And I'm yeah, your marketing would be more efficient. Your ROAS would go up. There's a lot of things that would change about your business. You get more reps, you get more product out there, more people talking about it. Instead, he's sitting on inventory for two years, some of his stuff. And I'm that's not good. So anyway, opportunity cost. Inventory is a real thing in terms of that. You think, I can't sell it cheaper because I'll lose profitability. It's actually, you could gain profitability by selling it cheaper. And people sometimes are just that doesn't make any sense to me. It's all dynamic though, too, So
anybody listening that just had an epiphany when Josh was talking, and that's the first time you've heard that, read Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, and figure out your accounting, because that will change your business. That's a good insight. I am going to follow up this statement with a question, because I could derail the entire conversation, but I feel the biggest problem with our politics is that people mostly want the same thing, but some people realize that there's such things as trade-offs, and some people don't realize that there's such things as trade-offs. And if you bring up trade-offs, that you want one great thing for the world but not another great thing because it'll come at the cost of something else, you're just demonized. So I feel it's not just true for a business, but yeah, we want all these things for our country. It's just going to come at the cost of some of these other things, and some things are mutually exclusive.
The great Thomas Sowell, that's one of my favorite quotes. There are no solutions, only trade-offs.
I love that.
So there's something you don't want. I gotcha. I don't like it either. But let's take a look at it.
Love that.
What would it cost us to make rubber cars with airbags on the outside so no one could ever get killed in a car accident? I'd love to have no one killed in a car accident, but is that really feasible?
Love that. What are the hardest trade-offs for people to make? But if I interrupted you, I want to hear.
Yeah, I think it's kind of just related to this. A friend of mine, CEO of a company called Casey Harvey, and they do environmental work, and he does a really great job of explaining to me. He's does his best not to take the sides of one energy versus another, but he painted the picture to me. It's like, if all the energy could be provided by windmills, but all in air quotes all the birds were killed, would that really be a viable, good solution? And so I think to some degree in the trade-off world, what's nice is if you can swing the pendulum so far in a hyperbolic kind of way, so you can say, what if all of our revenue came from this one customer? What would that do to our business? What if I think by exaggerating the strategy so far that it starts to break is when you know where the edge is. And I liken it. Do you guys ski or snowboard at all?
Yeah.
So have you taken an avalanche class by chance?
No.
Yes.
So in the avalanche class that I took, you have your beacon. It points an arrow. I'll try to make this tight. So it points where you need to go. Now, if it points this direction, you don't want to just run because the signal is actually like circular sort of. So you want to continue to follow it, because if you just went and ran, you'd be way far away from where your friend might be. So you want to follow the thing. And then once you get close, what they teach you is you don't want to move it a little bit and dig, move it a little bit and dig, and move it a little bit and dig. You want to move it here, and it's going to give you a number like 3. Then you move it over here, and it's going to give you a number like 3. And basically what you know by bracketing on either side, you know that you can find the center, you can find the location a lot faster by exaggerating your movements. And now you go on either side of that, and that's how you want to find where that beacon is. And ideally, the beacon is, just for those of you out there that, wear the beacon close to your face, because if they find your beacon, then you can breathe. But the idea is you're bracketing on either side of it, but you're swinging it kind of far. And a colleague calls it, try not to miss on the same side. He like if you're exaggerating, you're missing on the other side. So I've gone too far. That's a lot easier to figure out where this answer is, because it's in between where you were and where you are, instead of I don't know if I'm 1 inch close or 1 foot.
Do you run these as thought experiments in your business, or actual experiments that are costing you lots of money and putting the business at risk?
Generally more just thought experiments. Like
just the Excel, what does this do to the business?
Yeah, like what if you changed everything and it all landed like this, and be like, geez, that would cripple our, because it's all a constraint exercise. Like, where are the bottlenecks in my business? And you can only you can only really feel them if you pressure test them. And that's really costly and time intensive to actually pressure test them, and honestly just unrealistic. But if you can crank the numbers one direction, run it through whatever you have, and you go, wow, that's going to blow up, that's going to blow up, that's going to blow up, then you kind of know. Like, even for us, we found a few years ago, I sold some deal that was just really high monthly kind of retainer, and I now know that we're built differently now, but I knew that was my top end. So it gave me a lot of clarity when I was selling, because I was not going to sell beyond that. So I wasn't just trying to sell the biggest deal. I was trying to sell it became very morally clear in my mind of I don't want to sell this person above here, because I know we can't really even deliver on it, X amount a month. I could sell something bigger, but I don't think we could do it well. And knowing that constraint was huge for me. And in our world, if your client, saturation's greater than 25% of your monthly revenue, then you're probably too saturated.
So we've given a lot of good background on what the makeup of the founder leader needs to be, as far as intellect and being able to evangelize it, have courage in the face of fear. We've also talked about how important it is to have strategy. If you don't have it, you're missing out, and how few people have it. If somebody's listening to this and they want to go say, okay, what's the first most potent step I can take to figuring out my strategy? What do you guys recommend?
Start with an ideal client.
Yeah, I could take a little swing.
Yeah, take a swing.
I just love this story for all the positioning work or anything that we're doing with a client. Is we've all heard things like blue ocean strategy and go where people aren't, and that's all good stuff. But the story about 7th grade girls basketball in the Silicon Valley, have you guys heard this at all? Does this ring any bells?
That's a good story.
So I just love it because there's basically like the 7th grade team. They didn't have a coach. All the parents were basically like programmers in Silicon Valley. And as the story goes,
Is this a true story?
I think it is. Yeah.
I
Yep.
think there's a TED Talk or something on
Yeah, I
it, or
think,
YouTube.
yeah, I'm like 99% sure it's true. And the one of the parents was like, well, I think they're from India, if I'm not mistaken, and they knew cricket and they knew soccer. They're like, I don't know anything about basketball, but I know these sports. And so they started watching basketball, and they're like, why? It's so weird that they let the other team come up to the half court instead of applying defense earlier, because it just looked odd to them. And so once they started playing, there's sort of this realization that the girls on their team were not tall, we're not particularly fast, we're not good at shooting, and we're not really good at dribbling. Like,
But besides that,
what's left? They could probably play basketball. So it was like this good inventory of what they didn't have, like real honesty about that we are not good in these areas. But what they did have was they could have some endurance, they could have some scrappiness, and they could just do full court press all the time. And so the other little part of strategy was that the dad made a decision that he wasn't gonna yell at the girls when it didn't go well. And a lot of dads who were the coaches, they get frustrated and start yelling. Well, if you yell at 7th grade girls, like, it doesn't exactly make them better at what they do. And so as the story goes, they did full court press, they did this whole thing, disrupted. Pretty soon the other team starts doing, like, because they're just disrupted. They're used to being able to have space and pass and do, everything they needed to do. And so then when they started performing poorly, the dad on the other side started yelling, which made that team play worse. Anyway, they won the championship, I guess.
Wow.
That's where the story goes. And I think that story is really important for everyone thinking about strategy. Like, don't just look out there and see what everyone else is doing. Do a good inventory. SWOT is like a super basic. Everyone, like, the amount of times I've like said, we're going to do a SWOT. And people are like, oh, we just paid you how
Here
much
we
to
go
do
again.
SWOT. It's like, no. Just let's focus on your weakness here, like, and get real clear about what is it that we aren't. Because everyone thinks they're great at things that they really aren't. And there's one or two things, but really like one thing that makes them really unique and really powerful. And they're usually burying that with trying to do all the things. And so anyway, I just love that story. And I think by doing a good job of realizing, what are the constraints, what are the weaknesses that you have, and not trying to play someone else's game, but play one that will win.
Are you looking at the competition when you're starting this? What are we good at? What are we not good at? What does the market need? And you say, what is the competition doing, and how can we compete with them? Or is that not part of your...
In the early stages, I don't think that's part of it, because I think it can taint your strategy and it can water it down. Where in the early stages, I think you want to have the clarity of like a unique thought. Where if you too soon you go out and see what everyone else is doing, I think you lose sight of the problem. So the second part of this too is like your weaknesses. It's good to inventory, but so the basketball example, to win you have to score more points, right? It's very clear what the goal is and what winning looks like. In your business, you do have to be very clear about what winning looks like for your business, and use that balance of weaknesses and strengths to be able to say what would we do to win. So you do have to have a clear picture of what you're trying to achieve. Otherwise, it's just kind of an inventory for inventory's sake. Basketball is self-evident. In business, it's not. Generally.
I love that story. It's one of my favorites. Years ago, I did this seminar for a couple of years with Frances Fry. Have you ever read Service Excellence? No. She's a Harvard professor who kind of, I think mostly made this model. But she observed, if you kind of picture an axis, on the vertical axis are the attributes that you think are important in your industry. And on the horizontal axis, 0 is at the origin and 5 is like you're excellent. So Southwest famously has been more profitable than all the other airlines combined for decades, like combined. But if you were to go take an inventory, to Josh's point, of, the best basketball teams or the best airlines, right, the big daddies, well, they have airport lounges, they have 3 classes of service, in-flight meals, right? Go down that list. And then you rank Southwest's idea against that, you'd be like, we suck. But what they realized, and my understanding is in the very beginnings of Southwest, their target market were people that were taking Greyhounds across the country. And they were going to give them a shot to get across the country in a few hours instead of a few days. And so they weren't competing against them. So it's another almost like innovator's dilemma. And, they famously focused around low fares and friendly service and removed every other piece of friction so that their airlines, their planes were more highly utilized, faster turnovers, one set of parts. All the mechanics were trained to fix every plane. You never were sitting at the gate saying they were waiting for food service or all the other things you've ever heard, right?
There's no food.
Because there's no food, right? And so to Josh's point, I think it can be really dangerous to look at the competition and try to compare yourself against that because, winning in that thing is really at the end of this game, whose number's higher? There's a couple ways to get there, or actually many ways, but, offense, score more points, or maybe be way better at defense, or be somewhat good at defense that you incite the other coach who demoralizes his team and you win.
Part of the strategy.
Yeah, it worked.
I love that you use the Southwest example. I was in Florida a couple weeks ago with my wife. We went there to see our families, and it was right when the software bug happened. So our flights got delayed for 2 days. We were supposed to fly back with Delta, and then we had to buy tickets with Southwest. That was the only airline that was actually functioning, right? My wife had never flown with Southwest. So we're there at the gate, and, the Southwest lines are different. And my wife is like, this is a total disaster. Look at these lines. They don't make sense. We're already late. It's going to take forever. And I was just wait. Just wait. And they're incredibly fast. Like, it's different. My wife had never seen that way to board a plane before. And she was like, no, what year are we in? 1995 for them to still be boarding the plane like this? And somehow they board a plane faster than most, right? I want to flip the question a little bit. We're talking about strategy, and Court asked about the first step. I feel like as a lot of leaders and entrepreneurs, they fail because they don't dig deeper than the surface. And strategy is, we feel like a lot of entrepreneurs don't even spend the time on strategy. They just want to go, right? I have an idea, I know it's going to work, and go. They don't spend the right time on strategy. Leaders don't spend the time just thinking about the future and actually thinking deep about the problems that they're solving. Why do you guys think that is? Why are people not spending the time on strategy?
I think part of it's instant gratification. It's just, we live in a now kind of world, especially with smartphones, social media, communication. Just, we're looking to fill a void, and it feels kind of good to just sometimes do something, sometimes to sit back and especially if you have the wrong people in the room trying to build strategy, have you heard of the Working Genius framework at all? Pat Lencioni's book. It just basically does this cool inventory of kind of what you love, and not that anyone in that range can work on, not that anyone can't work on strategy, but typically strategy is a bit more higher level versus check the thing off, get the thing done, move it forward. It's more on ideation than it is on implementation. And implementation, you feel something, you see something physical. So that's kind of, I think, why a lot of people are drawn to let's implement, see if it works. In some instances, that's okay. With the scientific method, it's you change a variable, you run the test, you observe, make a conclusion. But in a lot of this strategy piece, you got to use some intuition and some insight, and you got to ask your mentors, and I don't know, it takes a little longer.
Yeah,
I like your answer better than mine, because my answer was always people are lazy. But I like your answer. Yeah, that is a good point.
I think there's something they call it survivor's bias. So, you all heard the statistics, this many businesses start, only this many succeed, 5%, or how many after so many years and get to these different revenue levels and so forth. And so when people go drive around, they see these visible successes. There's a brand, there's a store, there's a big business with a big building. They see this sort of end result, and they think, well, I've got an idea. And then maybe they heard a little bit of the beginning story. We started in a garage because we all start in garages, right? But I think we don't have enough conversations about what the middle actually looks like. So people don't, there's a lot that happens in the middle. I mean, we just went to lunch to meet a client today. And at the reception or the hostess station, there's what might be the original Harley Davidson first prototype or something back in that direction, right? I mean, it looks like a bicycle with a belt that goes. I mean, it's nothing like nothing. But if you just show up today and say, "Gosh, look at whatever the newest, sexiest model of a Harley Davidson is," and it's like, "I got a motorcycle idea," you like just there's no concept of how many freaking times they iterated, or just the conversation we just had with Dave Nichols that you had on some weeks ago. I mean, my goodness, the iterations he's been through to get to where he's at is just remarkable. But you don't see that. All you see is the end result of look at Nicholson Construction or Harley Davidson or whatever. It's like I never hear that really talked about, honestly, because we have podcasts with successful people and we say, "Tell us how you did it." "Well, Joe, what I did was," and it leaves out only like 99% of all the crap they went through.
You farmed lobsters, the coast of New England, and then you sold multiple.
Skipping.
Sold multiple companies.
And here you are
What else
today.
is there to it?
Right.
You just went from a deckhand to 3-time founder exits. Do you remember Taylor Harris was on the podcast and we talked about, I don't know why how this even came up, but he said there's this experiment ran where they put a bunch of men into a room and there was, I don't know if they went in one at a time or there's a group of, they went one at a time. And they went into a room and you could sit there or they had a little thing where you could shock yourself. Those are the two options. Sit there or shock yourself. You guys know how the story ends.
I'd be shocking myself.
Almost everybody went in there.
A contest of like, dude, do it.
And they started shocking themselves. So you have this option of sit there with your own thoughts.
And I think it was like 10 minutes only that they had to stay there.
Yeah,
it was like short period of
or
time.
inflict pain on yourself. You have those two options. And the vast majority of people that are going in there, I'm going to inflict some pain on myself over and over and over again because of how difficult it is to sit there with your own thoughts. Tony Horsley, who we had, was one of our very first guests. I was talking, he's been a great mentor to me. I said, like, "Tony, how do I figure this out?" He said, "Court, you just need to stop. When you started your business, your activity was your most important contribution. Now that you have a team, now that you have people, your thoughts are your most important contribution. So you need to spend way more time thinking and way less time doing, which if you just think and think and think when you're starting a company, your company is not going to go anywhere. So it's what got you here is not going to get you to the next level. You have to change your MO.
Yeah. And there has to be space for that thinking.
Yeah, I have a slight, not derailment. I don't know the best way to say it. It's just something I've been pondering a bit, and I wouldn't mind bringing it up. I don't know if this is if this will last or not, and I don't know how this works in Utah or in Salt Lake with the amount of people you have, because remember, like, Wyoming's got 580,000 people total.
The size of my high school.
There you go. That's right. And so I have this kind of hypothesis that in a place like Wyoming especially, but I think in general it does happen. That's kind of my question to you, is I think we put inventors in the entrepreneur bucket when they should sort of stay inventors, and we force them to think about total addressable market, the cost of producing something, the production of doing it. So you have invention, and then you kind of have the force to kind of imitation in the sense of like repeatability, where the kicking up the dust, inventing new stuff is where you might thrive. And then we force people to then take it to market, which requires process, and I just find that interesting. And I know in places, I think, where there's a more vibrant kind of entrepreneurial ecosystem, like I think Salt Lake has, where you can have a technical founder, right, and like a business sort of founder, like you bring the two sides. Does it sound like something that happens?
Yes.
100%.
Yeah. Well, in Wyoming, that doesn't really get talked about much at all. It's just like, oh, you have an idea, you should take it on Shark Tank, right? Or you should go make a business out of it. And I'm like, more and more, I'm like, man, you're an inventor, you should find that someone, you can retain 20 or 30% of the business or whatever, but have someone else go and take it. You're really good at inventing heat exchangers. Just like invent the next one. Stay here and let someone else go here. But I think we have this pride and we just have this desire as a society to push inventors into entrepreneurs. And back, I think, when products were not as ubiquitous, like if someone invented the light bulb, it was a light bulb, like it's going to sell, to a certain degree. 'Cause it solves this very basic problem, like in a novel way that no one else had. So great. But with the world we're trying to, invent in, it's like little nuances is what might make the product a little better. And it takes a lot of change and a lot of communication, and a lot of grit to like make it be adopted, I don't know what to do with all that, but it is just interesting things I've kind of pondered.
Well, it reminds me a bit about the connecting the dots. We celebrate the figureheads of things that become successful, whether it's a Steve Jobs or a quarterback or whatever else. And that fixation, I think, dramatically minimizes the myriad of contributions that without which it never would have happened. Mm-hmm. But, who gets invited on the talk show? Not the 10,000 employees, just whoever was last standing at the top, I guess. And it's not how it really is.
So I want to give people a framework by the end of this podcast of how they approach strategy. We talked about they have to first figure out how to get some time to be able to think. That means that you have to have a team that runs your company. You got to have an executive assistant that can check your emails, can filter your phone calls for you, so you can actually have some free time to put your head down and think for a couple hours. After that, you have to define your winning strategy, and please challenge this framework. So you have to define your winning strategy, and I don't know if this is a linear progression at this point. You probably have to bounce back to these, but define your winning strategy, define what your customer needs, and then define your unique activities that are going to give a unique solution to the customer that you're serving. Is there anything you guys would add to that?
Well, there's a lot, but I think those are three really big good ones.
That gets you a start.
Yeah. I would add on the thinking one, find a way to be a part of a community where you're going to interact with other business owners. I think that's just... Josh and I meet a number of leaders of really cool businesses that live in a silo. They just don't rub elbows on a regular basis with people where they realize like, oh, I thought I was the only one suffering with this, like, or and thoughts like that. You can learn so much from people, and especially some that are outside of your industry, like, because you make some unusual connections. Like, we're not in the same business, but like that was cool. I wonder if there's any application of that. Without YPO for me and, EO for some people or some sort of startup thing or whatever, it's hard to solve this stuff. We imagine that Thomas Edison sat by himself and did 20,000 light bulb experiments by himself, but I seriously doubt that was how it went down.
Love that advice.
I think maybe something that comes to mind is as soon as you start to go beyond just like you and a real small group, is you become an organization, which I guess is kind of like you become an organism. If you want to look at it that way, you become something that has some substance. And so I do think somewhere in here, it's important to be clear about your values and to be clear about like your purpose. Mainly from the standpoint of to create scale and to bring other people into the company, to allow them to recognize why we come here every day and what we're trying to accomplish as a group, and to be very simply reminded of that in a consistent manner. It's not just in the book that sits on the corner or whatever, but something that can be a part of everyday discussion to a certain degree. I think is pretty important. Because I think it speaks to it feeds the culture, and the culture is ultimately what produces new strategy and new execution, new cash, and new people that might want to join, And so I do think, I love, like what Rob sort of taught us was like 3 or 4 values, not 8, because you got to have enough, you got to have a few enough that you can remember them and use them for decision making every day, and to try to cascade decisions down further so you can have more time to think. But you can only cascade decisions down if you trust that those people are making decisions that are aligned with your purpose of your organization and the values of your organization. Because without those clearly kind of defined, stated, repeated, lived in, acknowledged, whatever, I think it can be easy for people to make decisions that really counter what you as the founder or the CEO are really looking to achieve. So that maybe be one thing I kind of.
Would you be willing to talk a little bit more about is Go Fast Don't Die the company that takes more of your time today that you're mostly involved with?
So no, most of my time is only co.
Only co.
Go Fast Don't Die is more big decisions, more of a partner level, I would say.
Okay.
And also more of a helping others make decisions every day.
Right. So as we talk about Only Co, would you mind talking a little bit about your values and the purpose of the company and how that has shaped things along the way?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So we've sort of newly established at least our purpose, and it's to liberate industrial leaders. That's kind of it. Liberate industrial leaders. And then our values would be cool people, cool projects. Bias for action. What if we can, not what if we can't. And then kind of a cliche one, but it means something to me, but I've never quite found the right words. But it's work smart, play hard. This idea that when we're working, let's work, and we want to have fun, let's check out, and let's work so hard and so specifically that we can check out and have fun and recharge. And so those are sort of our that's kind of our purpose and our values.
How have you seen a shift, an outcome of that already when you introduce those things in the business?
Yeah, I think the what if we can, not what if we can't is a really important one to me, because it's terrible for me when you're kind of brainstorming, like, what if we did this? What if we started to be like the docu-series company for industrial businesses? And someone goes, we can't do that because we can't even figure out how to get the trash taken out of here in time. You're just like, you are now uninvited to the meeting, and so it's like, we really need to lean into there's a time for you to have the reality check of can we really do this? But in the early stages, if you just want to kill any kind of innovation or momentum of doing something new and different, I really think it has to be what if we could do that? Not what if we can't, So that's a huge one. The other is as we develop new process and ways that we do things, I'm constantly asking myself, is this creating a liberating force for the leaders that we want to help support in growing their businesses? Is this helping unchain them from dogma or ideology or head trash that you just get consumed in? To your point, you got to have time to think, where your head gets filled with the noise and the trash of the everyday, and the way things have to be, or the way things have been versus what they could be in the future. And so, yeah, I think I'm always thinking about are we being a liberating force with our activity, or are we just making it harder on our clients? Because they don't need more. They don't need more stuff. They don't need more things. They need help supporting a new growth paradigm based on a new dream that we help them establish.
I love that. I yesterday, I heard for the first time, I was talking to one of my leaders, and she said this phrase that I had never heard. She said, what if you flop, but what if you fly? Kind of similar to the what if you can instead of what if you can. Court, do you have more questions about strategy?
Yeah, I think we're about to wrap. I have so many more questions about strategy, but I'm gonna ask for a book recommendation. But some of the questions we had is, how do you balance the dreaming versus the doing when you're making that segue? What if someone only spends time dreaming? That's obviously not going to be a successful situation as well. What is the biggest mistake people make when they're figuring out strategy? Why is it so dang difficult to figure out? So, also, what is the difference in strategy and how you approach it for a company under $1 million, between 1 and 5 million, and post 5 million? So tons of questions on strategy. But if you could just give a 1 or 2 book recommendation on where someone should go if they want to dive deeper into strategy, if they feel like it's their time to figure out strategy, do you have a book you'd recommend?
Give me an avatar.
Avatar for a book to read on strategy. Okay, we'll do one for startup founder pre 500,000 in revenue.
Okay.
And then let's do one at that crux where they're hitting what you're talking about, that hockey stick where they're going from the base of it up the handle. So like that 2.5 million. So 500,000 and 2.5 million. And you can pick if you want tech or service or product.
Do you got one for 500,000?
I'm going to give kind of just one of the books is right there. The 10X is easier than 2X, and then Who Not How. I mean, I just think they're like Toby's said, you got to read these, Josh. I'm like, okay. So I'm in the middle of both of them. And they're pretty darn good, especially at forcing a leader to be like, okay, am I dreaming big enough? And I love the question, is my dream big enough to allow other people's dreams to happen underneath my big dream? That's a great question that I have kind of been asking myself and having that conversation. And that's why 10X I think is so important as a thinking. And then the Who Not How is so important because it's like you can't do everything. You're going to have to find ways to trust other people and not jump straight to like, how am I going to get this done? It's like, well, who could do this? Who could help me? That's why the mentor thing, getting used to having a mentor, I think is really important because it forces you to like ask them like, what would you do? What do you think would be a good choice? And like listening.
Can I add a caveat to that? That's the worst question to
Sure.
ask. I totally agree with you at 500,000. If somebody's listening to this and they're under 500,000 and they're focusing on who, not how, I think they're making a horrible mistake.
I totally agree.
Because you can't outsource somebody building your company from the ground up. You got to do it. No one else can. But as you hit that $500,000 mark, that's when that transition happens of you actually can't get to the next level if you do everything yourself. So you got to replace yourself.
Yeah.
Well, the only caveat to that I would maybe add is this idea of inventor being forced to be an entrepreneur. I think early, you may want to sit down and ask yourself, like, maybe I give up some of my company to bring on another who earlier.
If they're a significant equity shareholder, I redact everything I said, but you can't. I don't think you can hire someone on salary or commission or rev share. It has to be equity partner in this.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've really had my mindset in the true startup, sub 500,000, 100,000 first customer kind of space. But I'm looking at your bookshelf here, Lean Startup, Eric Ries, Traction. I think stuff in that direction. And I've read them, but it's been a long time. But I agree. You know, the 10X is actually part of a trilogy. It's 10X is easier than 2X, Who Not How, and The Gap and the Gain. And they're written by Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy from The Strategic Coach. I actually did that for 11 years. Amazing program. And to me, if you said, look, you can only have 3 books and they're going to be your business goal, those would be the ones I recommend these days.
Really? Those 3?
I mean, there's obviously so many amazing books I've got nuggets out of. But if you really held my feet to the fire and said, you can only give me, because you can also read to death. One thing I'd say to people is be careful about overconsumption. Like, pick a frickin' model. There's a lot of good ones. If you've asked a few people, if you start asking about books, very often I won't read a book because you said it. But then I talk to Carlson, I hear it again. I hear it to Josh, I hear it again. It's like, this one might need to be on my radar screen. If that's not happening, move on, because you could literally read yourself to death on this stuff. And while there's a lot of similarities, you just need a construct. And many of them are good, and that's good is all you need. Like, follow a frickin' recipe. Don't read 100 lasagna recipes. Just pick one good one and make a damn lasagna.
And it's going to have a trade-off. And you're going to have to say no to every other lasagna